Welcome. I'm John Beck, a transitional pastor living in Portland, Oregon, inviting you into a conversation about conflict, church norms, and how we understand our influence as leaders in transitional ministry contexts. I love the story about Joe Sittler, a well-known University of Chicago theological professor, who on a trip to Israel, driving out in the desert, the car he was in started to have all kinds of engine trouble, and it was coughing and spitting and finally stopped. The driver told Sittler to go take a walk while he tried to work on it. And when he came back from the walk, he heard the driver hit the ignition, the car started, and it just hummed. And he heard the driver exclaim, "Zedekah." Sittler was confused because he understood that to, in Hebrew, mean righteousness. And he didn't quite get what that had to do with this car engine running so well. But when he dug in a little deeper to the etymology, he discovered that underneath the righteousness is the notion that everything is working together the way it is supposed to work. And the sad, heartbreaking thing for many of us when there's church conflict of such magnitude as we see it today is that the essential calling and work of our faith communities are impaired and even sometimes sputtered to a halt. But our purpose, our koinonia, our diakonia, to be the light in an often dark world. Our calling is to live out that light in our life together as faithful community, not to be sidetracked by frustration, anger, polarization, or even helplessness that so many conflicts engender. My interest in conflict and norms and influence processes emerged over many years as I've tried to bring effective and healthy processes into communities. Shortly after seminary in the 80s, I was trained in a quote, shalom process using Matthew 18:15-20, and put to work intervening in conflicts in congregations of the former American Lutheran Church. And I haven't stopped collecting tools ever since. The tools I assembled clustered around these values and goals: that we really need to be clear that unmanaged anxiety is really unhelpful. Clarity of deep purpose makes a huge difference. Direct communication is so important. And finally, secrets, gossip, and power plays are not helpful. And over the decades, I put a lot of wonderful tools into my toolbox. Here's a list of them. You could probably add many more that you have in your toolbox. And while they're all interesting and many are helpful, none of them was alone sufficient in attempts to help congregations effectively manage conflict. I've learned that it is most helpful when you know what organizational functions or systems you're trying to address with the tools you bring. And if you can get these conceptual ideas off the page into the behaviors of the congregational leaders and members, that makes such a huge, huge difference. How do you do that? Well, consider the relationship of models, norms, and practice. All of the tools that we use are models. They're examples of how to do something in a congregation. But what are we trying to accomplish? What's the map to understand the lay of the land in each particular congregation? And how do we assess the current congregational norms that are in play? What's the congregation trying to accomplish with all its various forms of meetings and activities? I started to call these congregational functions their norms or their usual processes of going about things. These norms reflect the congregational culture, their systems of getting things done. Just like a car has a fuel system and an electrical system, an engine system, a drivetrain system, steering and braking systems, and so on. So congregations have customary patterns of going about things and doing what they do or not doing what they don't do. As I've thought about congregational functions, I've identified 10 norms that I think need to be part of the life of a group if it's going to work righteously or hum along in keeping with God's vision for the church and keeping us out of destructive conflict. Here is a quick tool that I've used to engage leaders around this work and thinking about norms. Hi, I'm John Beck, and I want to chat for a minute about some of the challenges when leaders in a church are having a difficult time because it's not always clear what is going on. Just like when a car engine begins to misfire, we don't automatically know what's going on under the hood. How leaders open that hood to explore deeper can be aided by a simple diagnostic checklist of possible parts that may not be working properly. And many of these may not seem obvious at first. So here is my top 10 list for starting your church tune-up. Kind of like a David Letterman top 10 list for those of you who are quite old and remember David Letterman. We start the top 10 list with this one. Number 1, the big why. Are we clear about what our purpose is? And is that purpose guiding and directing much of our activity? If this is not clear, all kinds of trouble can emerge. Number 2, keeping God in sight is my gentle way of saying, how are we staying connected to our tradition? Are we engaged in scripture study? Are we engaged with the Word? And how is God's presence informing how we are moving forward? Number 3, where is the map? Many of us struggle because it is unclear exactly what our goals and our direction are. And we need a good map to be able to clarify exactly what we're trying to accomplish and how we're going about it. Number 4, this is a big deal. Ministry review is one of the most undervalued aspects of our life together. And we have to be able to say, how did we do? And in that context, to try to make adjustments so that we are moving forward in a positive way. Number 5, these days, we're more and more tuned in to the reality that there are all kinds of cultures that do things very differently than the one that you might be most familiar with. And that cultural sensitivity, or what I like to call cultural humility for people who are part of the dominant culture, is so key to how we can open the door to actually thinking about new ways. Number 6, this is another huge challenge in the church. Christian people are so nice, but we rarely have figured out how we're going to disagree in loving ways that don't become disagreeable. What are we going to do when we bump into each other? Well, having clarity about how we're going to disagree is a wonderful thing. Number 7, supportive accountability is one of my newest and most, I really love this phrase. How is it that we're going to have expectations of one another and do it in a way that is supportive and helps people be accountable? Number 8, seeing that everyone gets to bat. You remember how some people, when we were children, didn't get much time, and we want to try to level the playing field for people. Think about those of us like myself who are talkers, who just love to go on and on and on, and other people who are quieter and even shy. How do we empower shy people to speak up, and how do we help talkers to hold themselves back? That's about creating a level playing field. Related to that, number 9, are we clear about the rules for our dialogue road? In other words, more and more organizations and churches make explicit the guidelines that they want to use for talking together. And when we have those explicitly in place, then when things start to go south, we're able to say, hey, could we go back and reflect on our communication guidelines? Finally, number 10, how are we going to decide? Lots of congregations are a little fuzzy about what our decision-making process actually is going to be. And whether it's consensus or following Robert Rules of Order or anything in between, if we haven't been explicit about it, it's going to be something that can cause problems. Now, those are my top 10. And I am convinced that these top 10 provide a basis for a way to think about norms in our community that are crucial for us to move forward. And are there any of these top 10 that got your attention? You said, oh, we're really good at that, or, oh, I don't think we know much about that. Well, I would be glad to be part of a conversation for anyone that is interested in exploring this a little bit more. And I just want to say thanks for stopping by. So take a moment to think about these norms that I've identified. Which ones do you like the most? Which ones do you think are most important? Which ones have you emphasized in your ministry? Which ones have you seen strongly at work among the people you've served? Which ones have been absent or missing? Which of these norms could a congregation leave out and still have all the norms that it needs? We will explore norms again with more opportunity for interaction and dialogue in the full workshop if you choose to attend. So it's helpful to know what you and the congregation are aiming for, what activities and functions you're spending your time on and why. Let me expand the metaphor. It's like in basketball or any other sport. You want to understand the objectives and the rules of the game. It's helpful to have different ways of going after these necessary congregational functions. In basketball, you may want to look at how Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors carry out their function and operationalize the game. Or how Yo-Yo Ma plays the cello and operationalizes a score. Or how your favorite chef handles ingredients and creates a recipe. Or whatever art you wish to understand and engage with. Play the metaphor out any way you want. But over the years, I've spent a lot of pastoral time and energy teaching, coaching, nudging these ideas forward. I would figure out what we were trying to do and find some great examples of how to do it. And I thought these were the magic wands that would improve our faithful living and help us manage the inevitable conflict that comes from living in faith communities. I finally realized that no matter how clearly congregational leaders and members could read the map, and no matter how often they watched the pros, they wouldn't make any progress on their own game unless they got into the field and started playing, or sat down with the orchestra and picked up their instrument, or whatever image sums it up for you. Congregants need to practice acting their way into new ways of thinking. That is not what I had been doing by trying to talk them into new ways of acting. For example, as an Eric Law Kaleidoscope Institute devotee, I use the respect guidelines regularly with groups and churches I serve. This presents a model for people. It may suggest a norm, but it is only when lay leaders practice leading the introduction of the guidelines that they begin to internalize and really get it. Acting ourselves into new ways of thinking leads me to a renewed focus on behavioral practices, which brings me to my friends at Crucial Learning. In my work to help congregations effectively manage conflict, I've become a fan of the crucial conversation model, especially because of the research base that undergirds their processes. I encourage everyone to read the third edition that came out last year. I routinely have leaders take their free Style Under Stress inventory that helps people discover how they operate on the continuum of going from on the top, going to silence, or on the bottom, going to verbal violence when faced with a crucial conversation. Through this approach, I was introduced to their later research on how leaders effectively or ineffectively exert influence. They suggest, and I quote, "True and lasting leadership is the capacity to influence others to achieve important goals." What I've come to realize is that focusing on how I'm influencing a congregation is an effective pathway to helping a congregation manage conflict. Today, I want to offer a simple overview of the Crucial Learning influence model and suggest how it could be important for transitional leaders as they seek to support congregations experiencing change and the conflicts that, not surprisingly, accompany it. This influence model grew out of research. I believe that its genius is in where it begins. It challenges us to identify the results we want, what you want people to do. It's number 2. Determine how you will measure that outcome. Number 3, identify the 1 or 2 crucial behaviors that are most consequential, that are disproportionately powerful, and then engage at least 4, if not all 6, sources of influence. The model is built around the notion that in our organizations, we have 3 aspects to consider: the personal, the social, and the structural. Each aspect is explored through a lens of both motivation and a lens of ability. And each aspect can be connected to a different kind of influence. So here's the model, the 6 sources of influence. Our ministry context can be viewed through these 3 lenses, seen down the left-hand side. We engage with people on personal, social, and structural levels. Consider the personal row. We engage with people as individuals, each with a specific background and life context. Now think the second row, think social. We also relate to the social constructs of the church, the groups, the families, the fellowship processes, leadership cohorts. In other words, the way people are not just individuals, but they're also part of groups. And finally, in the bottom, and let me see if I can move myself to be more helpful. Finally, think structures. We have structures in the church that provide the organizational glue for our life together. Constitutions, bylaws, committees, annual meetings, officers, boards, budgets, mission statements, and so much more. Now let's look at each level one at a time. Granny and Associates discovered that in each of these contexts, there was both a motivational and an ability component. So personal influence has both a motivational and ability dimension. I may have a passion in box 1, a passion for getting things to happen. I want to serve on the church board. That's my want to. I'm motivated. And in box 2, I may have gifts as a leader to help this happen. I am able to do it. I can do it. In some cases, I may need training. I may need other support. But now let's think social. The social lens has both motivation and ability. For example, I may feel the peer pressure from my church friends to go on the church campout. There it is, box 3, praise or pressure. Peer pressure can be amazingly powerful. But even though I haven't liked camping before, friends in box 4 provide support and assistance with my tent, and I have a good time. Let's look at the structural components. Structural can have motivational and ability dimension. For example, I love this example. While it was hard to find members to serve on the church board, after the board planning retreat was scheduled for Hawaii, more people volunteered to serve. Rewards and punishments. Also, revising the church constitution after 47 years so that it reflected the actual local practice encouraged many members that the church was living in the 21st century. Structures, environments, and tools. Now, let's consider how a leader might leverage all sources of influence in a hypothetical ministry context in order to, quote, act people into behaving differently, into accomplishing their norms in a new way. I'm going to walk you through each of the 6 sources of influence using a ministry example. We use the influencer structure to set it up, and Grenny and Associates want us to start only after identifying the end point first. So where do I start in this case? Well, in my hypothetical ministry context, I know that some conflicts arise because there has been a lack of effective planning. So the outcome or results that I want are a stronger planning and review function for the church. This ties in with the congregation's norms of having goals and review processes in place. In the world of my example, the goals and review processes are not working very well. So, what aspect of planning and review do I want to focus in on? I recognize the weak muscle in our planning process is determining any needed course corrections. How could we measure this? Drum roll. One disproportionately consequential behavior is when leaders follow up an activity with a debrief session that reviews their goals and progress. We could call this an after-action review. We could track how frequently leaders have such an after-action review debrief session following an event so that they could determine how their goals were met and what course corrections might be beneficial. This can be measured. So, how can we influence these leaders to debrief the activities? How do we engage at least 4 and preferably all 6 of the influence sources? Here are some very rough possibilities just to show you the range of ways influence can be encouraged. We'll look at the 6, one row at a time, personal, then social, then structural. Imagine my ministry context is that I'm working as a leader with a volunteer youth ministry leader. So when it comes to personal motivation, the want to, here's what I'm going to do. I will reach out to the leader and carefully explain to her, as a key leader, the background to why we're using this after-action review process to track our ministry activities for the sake of our future growth, so that she will want to get on board with it. I'm trying to motivate her to play. So then in terms of ability, when it comes to how am I going to influence that? Well, I'll make sure that she and other leaders are provided and graciously invited and encouraged to attend training about how to lead and record brief after-action review conversations. I want her to feel confident so that she can do. Now think about the social mode. When it comes to social motivation, praise and pressure, I will praise ministry leaders for doing the after-action review, and we may exert some peer pressure from other leaders to make sure that we all get the after-action reviews going and reported. Peer pressure can be powerful. How about box 4? When it comes to the ability aspect of social, well, to help, we will have seasoned leaders who will walk alongside this youth volunteer as she does her first couple after-action reviews, providing help as needed. When it comes to structural, what's the motivation we're going to use? The rewards and punishments? Well, the church IT staff will develop a system to visibly track learnings from the reviews. Praise and appreciation for getting them done in a timely manner will be offered. And there may even be awards and incentives for leaders who get their after-action reviews done in a timely manner. You know, the famous Starbucks gift card. And then box 6, when it comes to structural ability, signage and paper and electronic tools will make this after-action review process more appealing and easy to use. And perhaps we'll develop an app that can be used for the after-action review. Ooh, an app. There you have a quick overview about how the influence model works and how it can have an impact on norms and engage leaders in practices that can make a difference, helping the community hum with greater righteousness, God's shalom. But now I need to share my 3 biggest takeaways. First, I have to own how I have primarily in my ministry only used 1 or 2 sources of influence to try to bring change. Second, as I have developed goals, they have rarely been particularly measurable, or they at least haven't been measurable enough. And third, doing the work of identifying the 1 to 2 disproportionately impactful behaviors is difficult, but it is also pure gold. So I leave you with these questions. What stands out for you in this conversation about conflict and norms? What gets your attention in this conversation about acting people into different way of thinking and the influence model? And if you plan to come to the workshop, what feedback would you give me about what you'd like more focus on? And I look forward to any thoughts you might want to share. Thanks for your participation. I'm glad to continue the conversation in any way that works for you moving forward. The goal of helping congregations hum righteously inspires me. Thanks for being here.